Hello friends, and welcome to your third singing lesson as part of the Triple Threat project. I hope you've had a great week and had a chance to practice those new breathing exercises. Super important that your power source, your breath, is feeling really flexible and strong because we're about to move into our second phase today, the sound source. So in this video, that's my cat, you're like, of course she has a cat, she's a singing teacher. I had to start the video again because then my cat went on to make all the noise in the world. So I'm going to try and describe how sound is produced and then how it relates to us as singers. So let's just even start with where the sound comes from. So you have a larynx. Your larynx is connected to the top of your windpipe and it's responsible for a few different things, namely sound production. It also serves as the air passage to which air can get in and out of the body. And its third function is that it has a protective mechanism. That means that no debris or cookie crumbs or water can get into the lungs when you're swallowing, so when you're eating or drinking. And inside of your larynx are two beautiful looking bands of elastic tissue called your vocal folds, and they lie next to each other and they can open and close and come close to each other. And that space between those vocal folds is what's known as your glottis. So that's your glottis area, and they're your vocal folds. And so those folds love moving open when you're taking a breath in, and that's what's known as being abducted. And then when you're breathing out, they have a tendency to want to come closer to each other, and also especially when you're going to be speaking or singing, and that's what's known as adducted. So that's the area that we're looking at that actually produces the sound. So let's start with what is a sound. So a sound is made when we have an interruption of the flow of air. So when any object vibrates, it causes movement in air particles, and those particles bump into other particles around it, and those bump into others and make them vibrate, and so forth and so forth. And we can think of that vibration chain in terms of a singing sound as being sound waves. And those energies, those vibrations, will only happen for as long as there is an energy source to power those vibrations. So when you think about dropping a stone into water, you've got that energy source. It causes those ripples, if you want to think of that the same way in that liquid. But at some point, those ripples are going to stop because that energy source is no longer producing energy. So now the question is, how do we get our vocal folds to vibrate? So if we come back to that water rippling idea, and we were thinking about that in terms of sound waves, we can now think about how the sound is produced for us. So we have the energy source, which is our breath, and we now have our vocal folds which are coming close together so that they can get ready to produce a sound. So now I've got this scenario where the breath is going to want to pass through those vocal folds. Now, if those vocal folds are wide open, there's not much resistance, and as a result, I might get a very, very breathy tone or hardly any tone at all. So something like no resistance, slight resistance, more resistance. And it's in that effort of the breath trying to get through a really small space, that small glottis space, that causes those folds to vibrate. So they've got that pressure going against them, and that makes those folds vibrate. And you can even feel your folds vibrating for yourself. So if you just put your hand around your neck and you just start talking, you can just talk or hum over the top of me. Most of my students do, I don't mind. You'll start to notice that you can feel these vibrations happen in your hand every time you talk or hum. I can even go one step further from that. I can show you the difference between an unvoiced and voiced consonant. So we're going to make the consonant in the same way, but in one case there's going to be no closure of the vocal folds, and the other they're going to try and come together. So consonant pair might be, for example, S and Z. So make an S for me. You'll notice no vibration in the hand. And now we're going to make a Z. Zzz, made in the same way, but one where the folds are not resisting that breath, and the one where the folds are coming in towards each other, so the breath is trying to pass through that smaller space of the glottis. You can even try them back to back. And if you remember, I put in a very sneaky exercise in our first video to help you with this concept. So now that we know how the sound is being made and why the folds are vibrating, we can now look at some of the ideas that are specific to singers. So when you're speaking, your folds are vibrating at anywhere between 100 to 300 times per second. I mean, that is just so cool. And when we sing a higher pitch, they vibrate even faster. So if I want to sing a high pitch or a higher pitch, my vocal folds have to accommodate for that, and to do so, they lengthen and they get thinner. And so I'm able to hit a higher pitch. At the other end, if I want to hit a lower pitch, they want to shorten and get thicker. And so if you've ever picked up a guitar and had a look at it, you might notice that the strings that produce the lower notes are slightly thicker rather than the ones that are at the top that produce those higher notes. So that's a good little way to think of it as well, if you've ever seen any of those stringed instruments to compare that to. Now, when we are looking at this vocal fold closure, ideally, if we can get it to be as efficient as possible, I'm going to get a really clean sound. And by clean sound, I mean one that doesn't have a whole lot of air passing through it. Now, why is that of interest for singers? Well, number one, it helps us with our projection. So if I have a breathy tone, the ability for that sound to travel in a room or a space or wherever, if I'm unamplified, is going to be hindered by that amount of breath passing through it. So the difference between ah, it's not very loud compared to something like ah, much fuller tone. You can think of it like blowing up a balloon and grabbing the edges of that balloon. And if you pull those edges really, really firmly, you'll find that that balloon will make a really high-pitched sound as that breath or that air inside the balloon is trying to get through those edges. On the flip side, if I let go of that tension and that gap with which the air can pass through gets larger, we get that sound. So that's why we're looking at trying to get a beautiful closure of those folds. So you might have heard it as being called vocal fold closure, or we also refer to it as approximation. So if I've got a big gap unintentionally, then I'm definitely going to be having a breathy sound. So maybe you're a singer that finds in their speaking voice they don't really have a lot of breathiness in the sound, but for some reason when you go to sing, you find that you've got a lot of breath in the sound. One of the other things I should point out, aside from the projection, is you run out of breath, or you can run out of breath a lot faster. So again, when we're looking at this idea of trying to sing through these elongated phrases, all of a sudden I've just wasted bags of breath, maybe in my first 3 or 4 notes, and then wondering why I can't sustain the phrase. Today's exercises are going to be focusing on that vocal fold closure and trying to find a really lovely balance through there. Exercise 1, NG. We're going to use a sung NG. So for example, when you say the word sing, sing, we're going to use that lovely sung NG to go through this phrase. Now, the reason we're using the NG is that it's a wonderful tool to be able to figure out the breath balance and vocal fold balance that you need to produce a sound. So the NG should really highlight to you whether you're using too much pressure or too little. So the pattern's going to go like this. All on NG, and you want to feel like this area is nice and loose too. Here we go. Lovely. Fantastic. A few more this way. One more, and then we're going to come down. Coming down now, and wonderful. A few more. Last one. Gorgeous. Exercise 2, the Goldilocks onset. When referring to onset, we're referring to how the vocal folds are coming together to produce a sound. I'm going to take you through 3 different types of onsets. One is going to be a soft onset, so where the breath is passing and then the vocal folds are meeting over the top of that. The second one is going to be a hard attack, or where we're using a glottal stop to start the sound. And then the third one, we're ideally going to have a mixture of the feeling of the 2 of those onsets. So the first example, what I'd like you to do is to actually let the breath start moving, and then the folds are going to come over the top of that breath movement. So, on an oo vowel. You ready? And wonderful. Now we're going to do a glottal stop. Now, a glottal stop is exactly what you've heard any tennis player do on a tennis court. It almost sounds like we are plucking the sound at the vocal fold level, and it sounds like this. Ooh. I'll do that again. Ooh. Let's see if you can give it a go. Did you manage to find it? Now we're going to try and put those 2 onsets back to back. So, hoo, ooh. Now, if you manage to do that, you should have had a sensation of where it actually feels your sound is being produced in your throat, which is pretty fabulous for a singer, because often we're like, I have no idea. So now, after you've done those 2 onsets, I want you to see if you can find that one that has a feeling of that breath moving, but also a feeling of those folds coming together that you had for that heart attack, and that we would have a sound like this. Ooh. So it doesn't have the breath, but it doesn't have that glottal stop that's starting it as well. I'll do it again. Ooh. You want to give it a go? Did you manage to achieve it? Now we're going to try and go through the 3 different ones. So, hoo, ooh, ooh, and glottal, Goldilocks. Did you manage to do all 3? You can practice that on any note so that you're starting to feel what it feels like for you to bring those folds together in a really lovely balance.